why don't you introduce yourself, Eric, and say where we are and who our guest is today and what are we talking about?
Hi. Welcome. This is a podcast called Terrifying Questions and How Not to Be Terrified by Them. And I'm here with my co-host, Tao Ruspali, and our guest, Geoff Dyer. Welcome.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be here.
Will you say where we are before? Oh, actually, let's ask Geoff that question because he knows this.
Okay. Geoff, where are we?
Oh, we are in Tao's Place at Bombay Beach. The first time I've ever been here outside of the Biennale. So it's lovely and calm and quiet.
It is. And we're on the Salton Sea in beautiful desert, California. And why are we asking this question? But
First, what are we asking? You haven't said what the terrifying question is.
The question for today, which Geoff is going to help us out on, is: are any human beings worthy of worship?
Are there heroes in a way?
It's a way of saying, are there heroes? Are there people who we should, who we can kind of focus what it's like to live a good human life by keeping them in mind as an exemplar? And I guess the contrary position is announced by Brecht in a famous quote from Galileo, where Galileo reveals that he is not a hero, that he recants his view of the heliocentric universe when shown the torture instruments by the Inquisition, and his disciple says, unhappy is a land that has no hero, and he says, unhappy is a land that needs a hero. So he's suggesting there may be a way to orient our lives without viewing some people as being worthy of worship. So we want to talk about that. What do you think?
And yesterday also you had a conversation with Geoff that instigated this thought in you, right?
I was being, I think, sometimes what happens is I'll be, and people might not want to listen to the podcast anymore after this confession of mine, but I'll make it anyway. Sometimes in the heat of argument, I'll say things that are intemperate. And the thing that I said that was intemperate was Geoff had said that Bob Dylan was great. And I said, no, he wasn't great. He just wrote great music, but there's no reason to think that he himself is great. And he said, no, something along the lines of Bob Dylan is like a god to me. Or someone said that about what he said. And that, I think, raised just this interesting question. And I sort of feel like the fact that I responded so intemperately must mean that on some level I'm activated by this question. On some level, this question works me up. So that's why I'm happy that Geoff is going to talk about it.
Well, the first thing we need to do is produce the transcript of last night's conversation, which will show that I did not say any of those things.
Okay. You said that Bob Dylan was a bargain basement Taylor Swift.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, shall we go back to the opening question?
Let's go back to the opening question. Are any human beings worthy of worship? This is a vexed question in the history of religion between Judaism and Christianity, by the way, but we don't need to get into that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, because it's quite often, that phrase hero, it goes very handily with worship, hero worship.
It does.
And then we often hear about, in tennis, for example, we hear of some young person playing an older player, and we hear that when he or she was young, the older player was their idol.
Oh, interesting.
And, it's, I'll say something about my personal sort of relation to all of these things. I like the idea of heroes. I have absolutely no capacity for worship. And I think I was in the fortunate position, because I went to school in England, and then for a very brief while I went to Sunday school, and it was, it's Church of England, and they were getting us ready to worship and praise God, and I feel so lucky that from a very early age, that was probably my first experience of real boredom, Sunday school, and it sort of put me off religion for life. And I have no capacity for worship. I'm not interested in worshipping anyone. And we can extend that a little bit. What I another thing I don't have any capacity for is reverence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just say something else about a book of mine, actually. I wrote this book about Andrei Tarkovsky's film Stalker. Do you know that film?
No.
Okay, so it's anyway, it's I think it's one of the greatest films that has ever been made, one of the greatest works of art of all time. And Tarkovsky is not just a very admired filmmaker. People worship him and they revere him. And some people took exception to my book because it was, I mean, it's screamingly funny, among other things. And I'm so glad I have no capacity for reverence. And it seems to me that reverence, what does that mean? All you can do is revere. You know, what do you do with a reverend person? You revere them. So I have no capacity for that. I have a great capacity for loving and admiring. And I think
Can I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah.
So there's two different claims that you could make. One is you have no capacity for reverence or no capacity for worship. And the other one is those objects of reverence, you also sometimes are irreverent towards them. Which are you saying?
Tarkovsky is an object of other people's reverence, but
You
I
have no
don't.
reverence towards him.
No, I love and admire his films. I don't revere the films, and the problem is, I think, here is that when you love or admire, so with reverence, it just ends there. That's what you do, you revere. But loving and admiring very quickly bring in their wake these questions. Why do I love and admire? So that's a kind of critical question you might explore. And even when it comes to loving another person, you're always wondering, why is it this person that I love? And you can go back to Shakespeare, where he enumerates, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. And he goes through all these lists of things, trying to seek for an explanation. Whereas there's no possibility for inquiry with reverence. And I like investigating
I think they're orthogonal,
things.
honestly, Geoff. I think you could have a love that doesn't seek to inquire, and I think you could have a reverence that does seek to inquire. I don't know if I buy this distinction, to be honest.
Let's confine it then to romantic love. I mean, when you're in love with someone, and let's say you've spent the day with them, and then, or spent the night with them, let's say, yeah, that's better. Then you spend the next day kind of replaying it, and you're just going through every detail why has this person had this effect on me?
You could, but you don't have to.
Oh, no, you don't have to, but you tend to.
I don't know that I tend to. I mean, just thinking about sort of like, you could talk about a person, you talk about the moon. And I love the moon. And I could inquire into why I love the moon, but I needn't. And I think it's funny, I think I'm coming out maybe more pro-reverence than you are, surprisingly. But I think, like, if I revere something, like, let's say I revere the human capacity for hope in the face of adversity, I don't think I necessarily have to spend a lot of time worrying about why I do, but I could. I could be like, why do I revere it so much?
I put it to you that you're not revering it. You're doing something else with it.
What? So what? I mean, we might need. It's going to get to that point in the podcast, people. We might need to define our terms. Reverence versus love. Yeah. What are the difference between these two bits of verbiage?
Well, I really think, I could be wrong, I don't know about the etymology of it, but doesn't reverence bring us almost immediately into a quasi-religious
I don't know what the word religious means.
Oh, okay. Well, we're really the standard is
I think
way
that's a big. Yeah, I think the distinction between the religious and the non-religious obscures much more than it reveals. You have a question?
Maybe the acknowledgement of the inherent sacredness.
That's reverence. You're acknowledging the sacred in somebody or in something.
Well, it's easy to see without looking too far. not much is really sacred. I'm not really interested in the sacred.
Sacred is certainly. Well, sacred's kind of an interesting thing because it's related to taboo, right? Mm-hmm. It's something that makes us sort of tremble with awe when we think about it. That's the sacred. But I think
reverence seems to imply that the person can do or thing can do no wrong. Yes. That you shouldn't laugh at it. Right? That you have to always take it seriously.
It goes hand in hand with piety as well.
Right. That's how I feel is the difference between reverence.
I guess what I'm trying to do is give reverence and worship a little bit of a less stuffy definition, because I think that makes it a more interesting topic. So
can we leave the abstract and go into the specific for a moment and talk about what instigated the conversation to begin with, which is what you felt was your hero worship of Bob Dylan. Right. Okay. And I'm curious, what your feelings are about Bob Dylan and how they might differ in your way you think about a great artist that you admire.
Let me correct let me produce my transcript of last night. I think what I was saying is that the remarkable thing about Bob Dylan is that for the last 50, maybe even 60 years now, he's been at the center of this extraordinary social experiment called being Bob Dylan.
What does that mean?
That he has been in this unique position whereby the focus of so many people, so much attention is on him, to the extent that it's really stopped him having any kind of normal life at all. And it's very different, I think, to the situation of, you were saying last night, or someone was, well, what about the Beatles? They were equally famous. But it's not about fame at all, nor is it even about the quality of the work that's been produced. I think the fact that there's not, Bob Dylan's had bands, but it's solely focused on him, whereas with the Beatles it was, split between the four of them.
Right.
We could bump into Ringo Starr this afternoon, I think, and we'd say hello.
Right.
But we're not going to then go through the rest of our lives saying, my God, you wouldn't believe there was this day when I saw this little person scuttling along. It was Bob Dylan.
What? Have you met him?
No.
Okay. If you meet him, you think you're going to be like, oh my God, that was a transformative. You just meet some guy who wrote some songs you like.
No, it would be more like being on safari where you managed to see a leopard or whatever. There would just be the fact of having set eyes on.
So here's a story I heard about him: is that somebody said that he said to them, the secret to life in LA, valet parking.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like a terribly transformative moment, that you met a guy who wrote some famous songs and he evinced a love for the convenience of valet parking.
But I like that. It's on a par with Eve Babbitt saying, another famous Angelino saying that the secret of life is perfect teeth. Uh-huh. I put it on that sort of epigrammatic level.
Well, maybe I'm Bob Dylan agnostic, or like Bob. Like, what is it about him that's so great? Why do you like him so much?
I hardly know where to start. But we'll try this. It seems to me,
we had to learn "Blowin' in the Wind" in elementary school. Nice song, and a politically brave song against the Vietnam War. But okay.
I hate that song with every single fiber of my being, by the way.
Oh, which are your favorite Bob Dylan songs?
Well, there's 100 of them, but what
and they're all better than "Blowin' in the Wind."
Oh, that I think. I suspect I hated that song before I'd even listened to it, when it had just been blowing in the wind, as it were.
Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, do you like
that one? I hate that too. I hate all the anthems. I'll come on to that. There's loads. They're remarkable.
By the way, if you said I really don't care for any of them, this podcast would take an interesting turn.
Yeah. That would be superb. That would be close to some weird form of pure anti-reverence.
I dig the guy. Anyway, I think he has to do his best work.
I'm dying to come on to the thing about Dylan songs, but let me make 2 points. First of all, is this: I've been listening to Dylan since I was 18 or whatever, and with every.
How old are you now?
I'm now 65.
Okay.
So what year would have this been that you've been started listening to?
Who's good at maths here? So I was born in 58, so it would have been
66?
66.
No.
You were 18 in 66.
76.
76.
Oh,
I
yeah,
said
sorry.
I was bad at maths. It turns out I'm like
There's
a Ramanujan here.
Raymond Smolin said there's 3 types of mathematicians: those that can count and those that can't.
Anyway, so that's a long
So
period of time.
1976, you put on some vinyl by Bob Dylan. You're like, I really kind of like this.
It took a while for me to get it because it's so unlike anything else. Anyway, and then the extraordinary thing for me is that nothing about Dylan has ever faded. I'll go through periods of maybe 6 months of not listening to him, and then I'll listen to him again with with an undiminished intensity, which is so rare. So, for example, I went to see The Clash in 1978. It was a great gig or whatever, and occasionally I'll put on a Clash song or hear one on the radio, and within 30 seconds it's exhausted itself. There's nothing new to hear.
But you just said you're bored with the only two, my 2 favorite Bob Dylan songs.
Those
already
two,
bored you.
Those 2, yeah. But there's such a huge catalogue of great things, and now I'll come on to my next point, which is this. It's occurred that whenever there are periods of great emotional upheaval in my life, then I've found that no poets express things with the directness and power that Bob Dylan's songs do.
So here's another song of his. I'm trying to go through my memory. So he's got this song that's like, if you could step inside my shoes, you know what a drag it is to see you.
Yeah.
I thought this was kind of a whiny sentiment.
And then he goes on, though, if you could just one time, and you'd know what a drag it is to be you.
Right. So this seems to me, it's fine, but...
That's another thing to make. Dylan's written lots of great love songs, and you would think that it would be nice to find that a Dylan had dedicated a love song to you. It's a very, very dubious gift, because typically the love song will be something like, I loved you so much, it's all over, and it was all your fault. So
right.
It's rarely an undiminished tribute. But to continue with this, if we think of not only does Dylan have that capacity to convey with great directness what we're going through, and I'll give some examples if that's okay. So I think of that moment in Idiot Wind. There's a verse that ends with there's a section that ends with the word glory. Okay, we have to have that for the rhyme. Then it goes on. You'll never know the hurt I suffered, nor the pain I rise above, and I'll never know the same about you, your holiness or your kind of love. And it makes me feel so sorry. Nobody else in songwriting history has got close to something like that. I think it's in the song Idiot Wind, which is itself unprecedented. Then I'd make another claim. So not only does Dylan express these things with this great directness, but then in Tangled Up in Blue, as it were, he comes up with a caption. He describes the effect that his songs have on us. So you'll remember that there's that weird moment, which took me some getting used to, when he says, she was working in a topless place and I stopped in for a beer. And if you had a capacity for reverence or worship, you might be a bit disappointed at that point that Dylan goes for a beer in a topless place. But that didn't bother me particularly. It still seems a strange thing to do. Anyway, then he ends up going home with the person at the topless place. And they smoke some sort of pipe. And then there's that bit where he says, she lit a burner on the stove and offered me a pipe. Thought you'd never say hello, she said. You look like the silent type. Then she handed me a book of poems and showed it to me, written by an Italian poet in the 13th century, and every one of them words rang true and glowed like burning coal. pouring off of every page like it was written in my soul from me to you. And when we're listening to Dylan, we have that exactly that directness, that what so we're listening to, we're not reading the poems by the Italian poet in the 13th century, we're listening to this record, but it seems to me that, it seems like every word is written in my soul from me to you. And there's so many examples of this where Dylan provides a commentary on the unique effect that his songs have.
So why this uniqueness thesis, Geoff?
Oh.
It seems clearly not true, but why are you making it?
Because I can't think of it, because so often it comes up with a conversation about Bob Dylan, and then they'll say something like, but what do people will say? Oh, what about Leonard Cohen?
Yeah, what about Blind Willie McTell?
Yeah, well, I mean that's very, very interesting, because of course after Dylan, that Dylan song, which was not included on an album, when it appeared on the first of the bootleg releases, if that's when it came out, of course then I went to I wanted to listen to Blind Willie McTell, and not surprisingly at all, Blind Willie McTell sounds so disappointing after Dylan.
I'm surprised.
The best thing about Blind Willie McTell turns out to be that he inspired Dylan to write the song Blind Willie McTell.
I didn't know he had written a song called Blind Willie McTell.
Oh, really?
Really?
I thought it was.
No,
I mean,
what
you were
about
setting me up?
No, I wasn't. What about Robert Johnson? What about Charlie Patton?
It's all leading up to Dylan. And
See, I find that a shocking statement.
I mean, that song Blind Willie McTell. It's just incredible what happens at the.
Because I've listened to plenty of Blind Willie McTell, but I've never listened to Bob Dylan's song Blind Willie McTell.
Oh my word! Well, I mean, the other reason that Dylan is so great, we can answer this question, is the first instinctive response was to say because he's just that impossible to calculate thing, a genius. But then actually it turns out we can start enumerating some of the things that make his genius, just as we can enumerate some of the things that make us love someone. It's because of this incredible saturation he has in the whole history of all forms of American song. So he's great partly because he has absorbed these people you mentioned.
Cannon's Jug Stompers?
Who?
Cannon's Jug Stompers, has he absorbed them?
Yes, he's a great student of their work.
I didn't know that. Are you kidding?
I've never heard of them.
So much like, you can't make jokes that assume, I mean, you can make whatever jokes you want, but I'm not very familiar with Bob Dylan.
Right.
So this seems to be now a debate about the quality of Bob Dylan. What I would like to bring it back to
versus the quality of Gus Cannon. You're right.
Yeah,
This is
I'd be curious about, first of all, is there an artist or a poet that does to you what Bob Dylan does to Geoff? And I'm wondering then, what is the appropriate response to being encountered with such an artist? And do you differ in these two responses? Is there someone whose words you read or whose music you listen to that has the effect on you that Bob Dylan has on Geoff from what he's describing?
I guess I don't feel the need to make such a strict separation between the greats and the pretty goods. Mm-hmm. Like, I guess I feel if I look at, like, Kafka and William Blake and Shakespeare and Joyce and Emily Dickinson, each of them has moments that are fantastic.
Yeah.
And people sometimes talk with Shakespeare about bardolatry, that you need to say, oh my goodness, Shakespeare was the best, and, Dante couldn't carry his water, and I think this is like the sports team approach of youngsters, and I don't think I need to say that. I not only don't I need to say that Shakespeare makes Aeschylus look like a loser, but I don't even know what I would be trying to accomplish, because they're both great and they're great in different ways.
Well, of course I'm agreeing with every single word you say there, but what I was saying about Dylan is just this really unusual the directness of the feeling that he does for me. And I mean, and I wasn't sort of saying, okay, there's Dylan in number one position, and whoever else.
Yeah, while it's Stevens catching up. Yeah.
But I mean, just to go back to Cohen, I mean, obviously I can never forgive Leonard Cohen for having written that song Hallelujah.
Why didn't you like that?
Because I cannot.
It's a heck of a tune.
Oh, really? I cannot bear it.
Other people ruined it, I think. I think if he had just done it could have been good.
The ruin was built into the original, though, I think.
But here's my worry about some of this discourse, which is it sometimes can feel like we want to have a special relationship with an artist, and then that can make us think that if we hear that song being played at the Super Bowl or being played to sell like frozen yogurt, that we'll be like, I don't like that song anymore.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that that's an exogenous consideration, because imagine no one had ever heard Hallelujah, and you were like in an Uber, and the guy driving it was like, I'm working on this song, and he played Hallelujah for you. You'd kind of like it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would think it was. Yeah, I would certainly.
You might even say, my Uber driver wrote a pretty damn good song.
Yeah. You might have even offered to buy world rights.
Right, you might be like, you wrote a song about King David, and it's like, I do think about that particular song. The thing that clangs on me is that I feel like he was sitting down and he was like, do ya? You don't like that, do ya? Wait a second. That rhymes with Hallelujah. I think I've got something. So to me, there's a slight clanginess to the number of cool, clever ways he rhymes things with Hallelujah. But I do think it's not. I don't consider it a crime against nature. No. I think maybe it's overplayed.
Dylan is of course one of the supreme rhymers.
That's good.
And then he also ends up sort of. Johnny Cash on the album sleeve notes to Nashville Skyline said of him he could rhyme the trick of time, which is quite good. And so it's quite interesting when on You're Gonna Make Me Lonesome When You Go, another song of incredible heartbreak, when Dylan actually uses the word rhyme. Crickets talking back and forth in rhyme. I could stay with you forever and never realise the time. Can we just bring it back slightly?
Let's bring it back. Yeah, I think it's like, how good is Bob Dylan? That's a good topic, but we could come up with a better topic.
But what I want to say is that I have this massive love and admiration for Bob Dylan, and I'm always trying to, in a sense, work out the question you've been asking me. Why is it that this person has such a hold on me? Which is exactly what motivated me to write the book about Stalker, this film. Why is it this film that I've seen 12 times, why does it have a more and more profound effect on me? So I'm always investigating this kind of thing.
Can I suggest something?
Yeah.
What if who you are was formed around the experience of Bob Dylan? So therefore you, Geoff Dyer, will never be able to come up with the explanation of why you love Bob Dylan, because Bob Dylan is the explanation of why you are Geoff Dyer.
Well, except I wasn't.
Except it's wrong. It's an interesting theory, but it's wrong.
And I'm not a laboratory creature whereby I've only been exposed to Bob Dylan.
No, I didn't accuse you of that.
Become who I am.
But it could be that you are a series of cultural and biological urges. And they coalesced around this pivotal encounter with Bob Dylan when you were 18.
No, because there were so many other pivotal encounters.
But he was a pivotalist.
A what?
Maybe he was a pivotalist.
He was one of many pivots, if there can be such a thing. So it was happening at the same time I was reading.
You've ever seen those snakes with all the pivots? That's a real thing. Yeah.
This is worth saying as well, that, if you've met me, you're meeting me now, and you're thinking that, God, this is a person of this immense sophistication and refinement. Of course you're thinking that. Now, if you met me when I was 17, you'd have thought, who's this beer-swilling yobbo, with no social skills at all.
Yeah.
But the truth is, that is how I seemed, and that was the extent of my social skills, really, which is just swilling beer in a pub. But the thing is, at that age, I had read Middlemarch. So already my understanding of everything that's going on between men and women and gesture and all of this kind of stuff, it had already been massively expanded beyond anything of my social experience by the fact of having read Middlemarch.
And why did you happen to read Middlemarch?
Because I was at school.
You were assigned it. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and thank God I was, because at that age, I was at a school with only boys, and I knew there were these creatures out there that I liked called girls.
I've heard about
them. I really liked them. I had no idea what you said to them, and then after reading Middlemarch, and not just Middlemarch, but everything else, I sort of got a sense of, that you might, of how it might be possible to actually have a conversation. That's a great game. But I really want to go back to...
I want to go back to reverence, but anyway, you go back to where you want to go.
I want to go back to reverence. Because the crucial thing is that, as I've enumerated all these ways in which I love Dylan, I absolutely do not revere or worship him, because worship would mean that I have to kind of include in the songs that I respond to, not only the awful anthems like Blowing in the Wind, but some of the absolute rubbish he's done, and there's so much rubbish in Dylan.
Right, but I guess...
And if he was playing tonight at, what's the name of the place we're going to?
The Ski Inn.
We're going to the Ski Inn tonight to hear our friend Janie,
who has
played with Bob Dylan,
yes.
And I'm really looking forward to that. If you were to tell me Dylan was playing a free gig at the Star Inn tonight,
the Ski Inn,
the Ski Inn, I'm not sure I'd even bother going.
Really?
I understand.
Yeah, because Dylan at the moment,
is enough already.
Yeah, and well, also, I mean, there's this kind of reverence for Dylan in his late stage, and there's only one song from the last God knows how many years that does anything for me, and it's all bound up with the way, the voice is so completely shot to pieces. And people, I've got friends of mine, they went to the Rough and Rowdy Ways tour, some of the gigs on that, and they were saying it was the most incredible thing. It was a nearly sacred experience, and I honestly don't believe them.
Okay, well, I guess what I'm trying to just wrap my head around here is whether there might be a more interesting definition of reverence.
You really want to get me revering.
I do, because I think it's
I'm not.
It's sort of like I want to do it myself, honestly, because I think there's room. Not that there's room. I wouldn't be accurately describing my own emotional response to other people and things if I excluded awe. And I think awe is something like, if I treat this experience lightly, I'm missing out on an important dimension of it. And I think when people maybe clumsily and maybe over defensively say, I revere that and you better not trash talk it, what they're saying is there's something profoundly awe-inspiring, and if you just make a joke about it, you look at let's imagine a cynic here, and I'm describing an awesome experience, and I say, when I first held my first baby, I felt some kind of awe. And then their response is, I felt that way when I got my first BMW. And I feel like you want to punch them in the face. You want to say, go to heck, if I can use that language. Go to heck.
You can say anything you want on this podcast.
This is an experience that ought to be revered. And if you're irreverent by making your joke about the BMW, get out of here.
Yeah, but you see, I wouldn't be irreverent, because I reject the idea of reverence.
Right, but what word we might be using two
I'm
words
happy
for
with
the
awe.
same thing.
I have a loving, admiring, being in awe of something. And I'm completely with you. I like the way that, as far as I know, you go to these national parks in America, which have considerable reputations. I think it's fair to say no one has ever come away from the Grand Canyon saying, that was overrated, or that didn't live up to its
right.
billing.
There are people. There was one of the. I wish I could remember who. One of the romantics was very pro humans as opposed to nature, and he said something like, if you feel awe looking at the sequoias, it's just a giant broccoli. But
well, I like jokes.
Just a big vegetable. It's just a giant vegetable. It just happens to have a woody stem and to have been around for a long time.
That's interesting that a romantic writer could have been able to say.
Some of them were
post-romantic.
Yeah, well, there's always, I think, this sort of push and pull in the human soul between human, radically different from trees, human part of the world of trees.
Well, it seems to me the ultimate expression of that romantic sensibility has got to be in Shelley's elegy for Keats, Adonais, when he says in those famous lines, what is it? Life, like a dome of many-coloured glass, stains the white radiance of eternity.
Right. It does,
so on the one hand, but I like the idea of the white radiance of eternity, but then it turns out actually I like all of the things that contribute to the staining.
You like staining, yeah. A little staining is good.
And then in terms of my personal responsiveness, after a while, I very quickly tire of Shelley's constant oohing and eyeing, and I much prefer the mud on the boots tramping and trudging of Wordsworth. So you get all the effort towards those ultimate moments of transcendence and consummation, whereas there's just not the muddy boot. Shelley's boots are not muddy enough, and I like the story. I don't know who told it that actually Shelley was just. He drowned because he'd rather just lie on the bottom than admit that he couldn't swim very well.
Wow, who was so mean
to say that?
And so, what do you make of people like Eric's doing this to a certain degree, but our friends Aaron and Emily do it even more? That are just completely dismissive of Bob Dylan. He's an okay songwriter, or even worse, he's not even a good songwriter. Are they just missing out on something in life, or
that's just their period? Those people who say that are just having a very, very late in life or very prolonged adolescence. I think. I constantly go back to thinking, it's just like this thing where you can quite easily think, God, if only I could have been there, the first time Beethoven's Fifth was performed, to have heard those, notes before they entered the realm, before they became sort of semi-like cliches. And I often think, if only I could hear again and remember just how weird it was when I first, how weird I thought that song Idiot Wind was, because there'd been nothing like it I'd heard before. But somewhere in my responsiveness to Dylan, every time I listen to these songs now, which I know them off by heart. By the way, the songs are always being changed by him, but they still retain some of that unassimilable quality. So there's always things that I'm discovering them anew. But you can't take seriously somebody who says who is dismissive of Dylan. I mean, Martin Amis famously said that as soon as somebody starts questioning Shakespeare's greatness, you can just abandon the conversation at that point because you're not going to learn anything from them.
I wouldn't abandon Tolstoy. He was a pretty good writer.
Yes.
In fact, he was a little better than Martin Amis.
Well, that's yeah.
Yeah, he was.
And why he didn't like Shakespeare?
He hated Tolstoy. He hated Shakespeare. He said Shakespeare was nonsense.
Well, I mean, yeah. There's that great George Orwell essay, Lear, Shakespeare and the Fool, where he accounts for rather brilliantly, I think, for Tolstoy's strange inability to appreciate Shakespeare. And Orwell's thing is that he had to say that because his talent was so nearly Shakespearean. So
my point is just
it.
I'm gonna disagree with Amos.
Yeah.
That if your argument is, and I'm using that to make a larger point, which is,
if you're Tolstoy, it's different.
Everybody, but
he gets a hall pass, I think.
No,
rather than just a person down the street.
I actually have a different take on this, which is I think There are many paths up the mountain, and one of the nature of some of the paths is that you don't see some of the other paths.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a fact. So if you utterly commit to Baroque music, you might well not like Bob Dylan. If you utterly commit to rap, you might not like Bob Dylan, and that's fine. And then I guess if I can just kind of start steering it back to shore, like, it's important, I think, to both have heroes but also recognize our own fallibility when we pick heroes. Like, I sort of feel like both of them are important tools in our tool chest.
And our hero's fallibility.
I'm sort of accepting, like I don't think anyone listening needs to be told that, honestly. I think everybody is sort of like, yeah, feet of clay, been there. But I do think sort of we need them, and we also need to maybe have the ability to understand, like forgive ourselves for the neediness that makes us need heroes, but also recognize that it is a form of neediness. What do you think about that?
No, I mean, I mean, fundamentally, we're so in agreement, because I would not say, I'm certainly not going to get into some absurd sort of thing whereby we have to say, okay, it's an either or, it's Shakespeare or Tolstoy.
No, that would be a silly
that would be
person.
daft, because actually, we're around for quite a long time, and our lives are enriched by all of them.
I, as a European visiting America, what do you think of this Tocquevillian claim that America, we tear down heroes too much? We haven't learned the ability to respect heroes, and that's a kind of a insidious poison spread by democracy.
I think actually we tend to tear them down much more rapidly in Britain. Actually.
Oh, is it too?
Yeah, I really think so.
And is it bad? Like, do you think we should teach young people, don't be so quick to look at The Simpsons and look at the parodic version of something. Why don't you learn to actually accept that there's greatness?
Well, it's funny. I mean, we go back again to something we were saying, where you were saying if you had you don't. There are certain situations so awe-inspiring that you don't want them to be undercut with a joke.
Right.
Whereas actually, I think very often that one of the things that enables me to express a feeling of awe without embarrassment is the freedom to then undercut that with a gag.
Why are you embarrassed by expressing feelings of awe, Geoff?
Well, I'm not, because I know I've got access to that thing of being able to. I mean, the joking about Tarkovsky, for example, goes hand in hand with being susceptible to the power of his work, and being. I mean, joking about things is so entirely compatible with taking them very, very seriously and taking them to heart, isn't it?
Right. Well, sometimes I wonder if it might not be a form of nervousness.
Joking?
Yeah. Of discomfort with the vulnerability.
It's difficult for me to. How can I say when I'm just breathe. I'm English, so I breathe the joking is. That's what you're brought up on if you're English.
But is that because it's a class-ridden and nervous society? So it's just an escape valve for all that.
Yeah, they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I don't know.
You can't have lunch with the person, right?
You bear such a grudge, Tao. I mean, I was able.
Geoff won't have lunch with a man.
No, that's not true.
Who's this man?
Any.
Oh, he won't have lunch with any man. Okay.
If you're facing each other.
I don't. I prefer not. I've got these two very old friends.
If we had sandwiches, you wouldn't have had this.
That would be fine.
Oh,
yeah.
Because there's more than two of us.
There's lots to here.
Oh, a single person.
I've got these two friends in London, great old friends. We've known each other for ages. The three of us meet up. If one of us cancels, then we abandon the whole thing, because we can't face seeing each other on a one-to-one basis.
I see, because what would be said?
Well, there wouldn't be much opportunity for banter, and we wouldn't be able to achieve that lovely triangulation of kind of seriousness, joking, and all that sort of stuff.
That nervousness you're alluding to, I was bringing this up as evidence of
Not
that nervousness.
You would be uncomfortable with the intimacy.
I think that's what's really going on.
Well, Tao is it hurt him so much this day when he'd set his heart on having lunch with me, and I said, I really don't want to have a one-to-one.
Right.
And I said, if I do agree, if I grant you this audience, it's got to be forward-facing. We can't be looking at each other across a table.
So we had to sit at the bar in the restaurant because I was hungry and I wanted to eat and not face each other.
Face intimacy, which you didn't like.
I just can't take the intensity of that.
Oh, interesting.
The one-to-one. Anyway, and then obviously he was so happy that I granted him the audience that he bought me my lunch, which is what I really wanted all the time.
Fair
anyway.
enough. Yeah. Fair enough. Well, I think we answered this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. It turned out we agreed.
You agreed more than you thought at the beginning.
Right. Yeah. So were we terrified to begin with? Maybe we weren't. I mean, the initial question was, are any human beings worthy of worship? And it seems like if you can I don't think we answered it now because I'm thinking like
we still have a few minutes before we up to our hour. We're 46 minutes in, so
perhaps
unpack it a little more.
Perhaps it relates to another. I mean, I think we can have very, very fulfilling relationships with the world, and we can just we can do without worship and reverence. And also, it comes back to this other little sort of bicker we had last night about earnestness. If you remember that.
So let me. I do remember, but let me say one thing, which is I think I'm starting to zero in on what I find interesting about it. Is that so human beings are face to face with our mortality. We're face to face with the threat of death. Worship is something that you can relate. It's a way of emotionally relating to something that helps you make your peace with your own mortality. And the question that I'm curious about is, can a relationship with a human, an individual human, Bob Dylan, Jesus, any individual person, can that be a worthy response to the terror we have of our individual mortality? And I think that for those people for whom the answer is yes, worship is a pretty good word for that relationship.
Well, what do I say to this? I don't know. I mean, I just feel I'm able to get by without any worship. I mean,
right,
how
that's what I think
it would be if you said you worshipped your wife, for example. That would just be daft, wouldn't it?
I don't know, because it would be a way of saying part of what makes my brief time on Earth meaningful to me is the relationship I have with my wife.
Of course, I'm not I've got it. What if I opposed that? That would really make me a head case. That's so different though to saying that. That's fine because it didn't have the word worship in it. I'll sign that piece of paper, that declaration.
Right. I guess
Right
I'm trying to come up with a secular definition.
No, the problem with the worship also is probably it would make the wife not feel like you're actually appreciating her in her humanity. It would like be deifying.
Yeah.
That's what we were worried about a little bit yesterday
women have
too.
Always complained about that being put on a pedestal, and as soon as
yeah,
something's
that's
put
not
on
cool.
a pedestal, then of course
Right.
that's just a
Right, there is
precondition for it
yeah,
being knocked off.
Sure, that's true. There is an aspect of worship where you sort of feel like I'm giving up my own need for living a meaningful life and I'm putting it on you. And that's not cool. I agree with that.
What about namaste?
Namaste, the God in me acknowledges the God in you.
No, are you leaving? Namaste.
There we go. Good. Yeah.
Wordplay. No. Yeah. Yeah. What about that?
What namaste?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't. I mean, to make. I mean, this is a joke I've made before. This one I've got to say is this is up the sleeve, not.
Fair enough. That's kind of you to.
Not off
that's
the
honest.
cuff. Yeah.
That's honest.
But I don't have a spiritual bone in my body. Yeah, that's my take on that. I don't need to recognize the God in you. I mean, because, you know, I mean, I like being in your company. Isn't that enough?
Not enough for me.
Yeah. Namaste.
Is it enough for you, Bob?
It feels like, this is the question about reverence and the question about worship and the question about the differentiation between admiration and elevation, I guess. Aligning with something higher seems like an opportunity. Doesn't mean that it has to be a responsibility or has to be a necessary element. But seeing my wife as a fantastically beautiful incarnation of the goddess is a lovely experience.
Well, the word goddess, I was fine until we got when you were saying lovely and beautiful. That was okay. Actually, this namaste thing. An Italian friend wrote this great story about he lives part of the time in Italy, and of course, in India, and of course that's a place with there's a lot of stuff going on.
God's
there.
everywhere you look.
Yeah. And, and I would say, actually, with reference to this, I'm not sure I could have endured my time on Earth without Indian classical music.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, that answers something very, very deep in me. Anyway, but, part of the problem in India, of course, is there's so much hassle. And at the end of this story by my friend, there, people trying to sell him tat on the beach or whatever, and the last lines of his great story are, he says, "Yeah, namaste, motherfucker." Mm-hmm. So I think that nicely compresses the two things.
Because Bob was comparing his wife to the mother goddess.
What about worshipping as a search of meaning that you externalize for sort of safety? So you're kind of like, you need something outside yourself to give meaning to elevate in order, because it's all about us ultimately, we are basically give meaning to the outer space. So in return comes back to the inner space. Yeah.
Well, the worship seems to me, again, that's the end of the search, if you will. But I would say also, I mean, obviously that was a joke about not having a spiritual bone in my body, a bit, because bone is not, if you need the bone to keep you walking upright. But
because there's the sacrum, which is the same. It means the sacred bone.
Aha.
Yeah.
There goes your jokes.
There we go. Yeah. But what I'm constantly surprised by is that I've travelled a lot, and I'm always drawn to places where I feel time has stood its ground.
Uh-huh.
So, and these are very often places of, the places built for, some sort of sacred purpose.
Something that seems deeper than the fact that our lives come and go, like the leaves on a tree.
Yeah. And it comes, and I can respond to that irrespective of the faith that that's given rise to these places, and then I'm very much in the sort of same frame of mind as Philip Larkin, in that great poem of his Church Going, where he says he comes across these churches in England. And he says, oh, here it is, I'll stop and have a look. So he gets off his bike. Hatless, I take off my cycle clips in awkward reverence, that famous line. And then he goes in and he says, well, okay, it's a church and it wasn't worth stopping in. But then he says, but stop I did and always do. And then he just talks about the way that... there's something about it's a faith, it's an expression of a faith that he doesn't share. And then he says, a serious house on serious ground it is. And then it ends rather beautifully with him saying, even when the last believer has gone, when it's fallen into ruin, there will still be something special about this place. And then he ends with this beautiful line where he says, if only because so many dead are lying around.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. I mean, I know what I mean. I'm interested not in I respond to the primal, and I feel that's what he's giving expression
The primal,
to.
yeah. One of the things it reminds me of is one of the basic virtues in Confucianism is respect for the burial of the dead. And I wonder if part of our feelings of reverence have to do with how should we treat the dead bodies of our fellow humans. And there's that famous Grimm's fairy tale about the boy who lacked the capacity to shudder, and he could like play like dice with the bones of his dad, and somehow this sort of weird combination of guilt and a need to assuage that guilt. I don't know how well this is shared, but I sort of feel like the way we treat the bodies of our dead it's such a primal ambivalence.
It's so funny though, Eric. Every time you use the word reverent, I can so quickly think of a rewrite of what you've just said that I'd be happy to sign. So if you'd be okay with me inserting the word respectfully rather than reverently there about how we treat our dead, then we'd have a deal.
I'm looking for something that feels a little yuckier.
Right. Well, and I can do a certain amount of yuck. Like when there's famously cheesy lines of Auden. If equality of affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. I'm happy with that because it's a nice bit of practical
It is a
advice,
Hallmark card, but yeah. So before we call it a day, let's hash this out about earnestness.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a little...
Because I was sort of half making fun of you by saying that I'm against comedy and I'm only in favor of earnestness because I find that a funny thing to say. But I also wonder if it's not also a true thing to say.
Well, I remember this from last night when, because we'd only just been talking for a little while, and I think Tara said you were being earnest, and then you defended yourself, and then, and I so remember this, and a really pivotal moment, when Nietzsche is full of life-altering insights, but, that bit where he says, earnestness, yes, the sure sign of a slow mind.
Right.
And, I think that's one of his great psychological insights, and it's one of the reasons why as soon as somebody comes around trying to sell you their religion, they're always doing it in a typically in an earnest way.
We're always like rush. What's the slow cooking versus fast cooking?
Yeah.
What's wrong with the slow mind?
Well, to quote Nietzsche again, I like his thing where he says, my attitude to deep philosophical problems is to treat them like a slow bath, like a cold bath, in and out as quickly as possible.
Why's he in such a rush?
I think because actually in those first seconds you can have all sorts of it's the lightning flash of insight, I think, as opposed to something more sort of drudgery, really. But, I can see, for example, no writer has had a deeper effect on me than John Berger, who I think is not funny at all, probably moves towards the earnest, and I guess there are times where that kind of thing, he was mainly a writer on art, so that kind of thing is okay, I'm going to stand looking at this picture for as long as it takes for it to reveal its mystery,
and not side by side like you and Tao, face to face.
You could say that Nietzsche is one of the things he's saying the quiet part out loud, that the reason for not being earnest is to show your mental superiority to someone. It's kind of a way of showing off and distancing yourself and
I do think it's a way of saying you can't sell anything to me, buddy.
Right. And he says it very earnestly.
No, he says it like most things. Nietzsche is a great joker, isn't he?
He is.
A cosmic jester is how he described himself.
Yeah. Well, I think this is beautiful. Do you have any last licks?
No, only that you said that you were going to bring it, what would you say? You're going to bring it into shore, and that makes sense because, as a certain Bob Dylan once wrote, time is an ocean, but it ends at the shore.
He wasn't wrong.
Are you going to listen to some more Bob Dylan now?
Absolutely. He sounds good.
Yeah.
He sounds worth a listen to. Okay.
All right, thanks.
Okay,
This
thanks
has
a lot.
been Terrifying Questions and Being in the World. Fun with the studio audience.
Let us pray.